Welcome back, everyone. For today's video, we are going to be taking a look at day number 3 of the Super United Rapid and Blitz Chess Tournament, which is part of the Grand Chess Tour and being held in Zagreb, Croatia. Now, all eyes are on the current world chess champion, Gukesh GOATkesh from India. The 18-year-old has been on a massive run, having won 5 games in a row, including defeating the 5-time former world chess champion Magnus Carlsen. Now, it may not come as a surprise to some to see Gukesh doing well, but as you guys know, with all the comments from players like Fabiano and Magnus about how Gukesh is a little bit weaker, or presumably one of the weakest players in the field in this event, you kind of might be a touch surprised. Nonetheless, Gukesh is on a massive heater, 5-game lead, 5 wins in a row, and now he continues with the white pieces against Anish Giri in round number 7 of the event. So let's see if Gukesh can make it 6 wins in a row. So the game starts with the move e4, and now we get the move pawn to e5. Here Gukesh plays knight f3, we get knight to c6, and now we have the move bishop b5. Anish plays knight f6 here, showing that he's ready to be Mr. Solid by playing the classic Berlin defense. So after we get the move knight to f6 in this position, Gukesh plays move d3, and now we get the move pawn d6. Now, in recent times, a lot of top players have primarily played this move bishop to c5. It's not necessarily any better than d6, but it's considered to be a little bit more topical. Anish, however, one of the best prepared players in the world, goes d6. We get castles, bishop e7, and now we get the move c3. Anish castles, Gukesh plays rook e1, we get bishop d7, and now we get the move bishop a4. Now, one of the things that's very similar between the Spanish or the Ruy Lopez and the Gucci piano, also known as the Italian game, is that you generally get very similar structures where you have pawns on e4 and d3 versus pawns on d6 and e5. But one of the big issues for white here is that you'll notice this bishop on b5 is outside of the pawn chain, and the big thing that you want to avoid, especially if you're at the beginner level, is letting this bishop get traded. So for example, if white were to play bishop c4 here, after knight to a5, you can't move the bishop to b5 without the bishop hanging. And if you don't move the bishop, I'll chop it. And if you go bishop b3, after takes, black ends up with the bishop pair. That is why Gukesh plays move bishop to a4. He wants to drop this juicer back to c2 with the bishop behind the pawn chain. And if white can get the bishop on c2, as you guys are about to see here after a few more maneuvering moves, white's idea is to play for d4, building the big white center, but you also have this bishop guarding the pawn on e4 after the pawn thrust. So after this move bishop c2, we get the move knight to g6, and now Gukesh plays the move pawn to d4. Anish plays c5, we get the move pawn takes pawn, and now we have a4 being played. Now, at this point, you can tell that Anish's preparation has been a little bit better than the current world champions because Anish has been moving relatively quickly, and the computer gives black a tiny advantage. That being said, this is, of course, a rapid game. So in a rapid format, you don't have all the time in the world to think. And in fact, I would say that in rapid, when I evaluate this position from a human perspective, I don't think that black is better because black is the one who's going to have to find the best moves, and with limited time, it's going to be very hard to prove an advantage. So we get queen c7. Gukesh plays queen to e2, and now we get the move pawn c4. Gukesh plays knight f5, and here we get the move bishop c5. Now, the computer here wanted Anish to trade the bishop for the horse, and after pawn takes, there's this move e4, knight to d4, and then knight f4, and black is better here, but in a classical game, you might be able to think for 20 minutes and calculate all the variations. In a rapid or blitz game, there are moments where you have to trust your intuition and just go. You can't simply calculate long lines because losing the time early in the game can affect you later. Now, the reason I mention this is because after knight f4, in a blitz game, I'd be like, what is this? Just takes. Pawn on c4 is weak, e4 is weak. White can play like g3 here with these two weaknesses. How can white be worse? But after queen c7, with the bishop coming to c5, the computer gives black a substantial advantage. But again, rapid or blitz, you have to make judgment calls, and it's not that easy to work out. So after knight to f5, Anish plays another logical move, which is bishop to c5 here, putting the juicer on the nice long diagonal, and now we get the move bishop e3. Now, you might be thinking, wait a second, queen takes c4, right? Free pawn. White's fine. Well, no. If white were to play queen takes c4, this runs into a classic fossil as there's bishop takes pawn, checking the king on g1. When you take the juicer, there's queen takes queen, you've lost the queen, and with it, you've lost the game. So white cannot take the pawn on c4 here. It's a very explosive pawn, and instead we get the move bishop to e3. Now Anish plays move bishop to e6, guarding this pawn on c4. We get g3 here, trying to stop black from jumping with the pony to f4, and the game continues with rook d8. We get rook d1, a6 is played here, and now Gukesh trades the rooks and plays this move a5. Now, as you can tell from the evaluation bar, the position and the evaluation are shifting slightly. White is no longer worse here, and the main reason for that is that black cannot connect these pawns. So right now, if black ever moves the bishop, you lose the pawn on c4. What you would love to do is play b5 here, get a position like this with a chain of pawns connected. Black is doing very, very well in this position, but if you ever play the move b5, this is a big mistake because of the classic glitch move with n peasant, pawn takes pawn here. It looks like an illegal move, but as many people have to have learned by now, this move has been around since the 1700s. So because black cannot build the chain of pawns due to n peasant, this pawn on c4 is a little bit weak. White has a good knife on f5. The knight can't jump to f4, so white has a very tiny advantage. So here we get the move knight to g4 from Anish. We get takes, and we get h3, knight back to f6, and now we get the move queen e3. Now it's in this position that Anish plays the move rook c8, and this is the first step in the wrong direction. Probably here it would have been preferable to move this knight to d7 so that you can bring this knight to a better square on c5. This is one of the hardest things in chess to do if you are not at a top level, which is the maneuvering of pieces to better squares. It's very difficult conceptually to do it because generally if you look at this position, you think this knight, it's a great piece, right? It targets the pawn. You can't really go to g4, but it looks good because it ties the bishop down to c2. But in fact, if black could magically put this knight on c5 here, the knight targets the pawn from c5, but now there are other ideas like knight d3 or knight b3 as well. This knight has so many possibilities, whereas when it's on the f6 square here, the only thing it does is target the pawn at e4. So say you got this position, where can the horse go? You can't take the pawn, but you don't have other opportunities. Knight h5 doesn't do much. f4 is covered by the pawn. You can't go to d5. So maneuvering the knight to d7 would have been a better choice. Anish plays rook c8 instead. We get rook a4, and now we get the move queen takes queen, knight takes, and here Anish plays the move knight to e8. Now it's very clear that around this moment in the game, Anish was definitely thinking, I'm about equal here. I want to kill Gukesh's 5-game winning streak. It's time to bail out, make the draw. It's a boring position. Let's just play simple chess. This, however, is one of the biggest mistakes you can make in chess, especially at the upper echelons of the game, because right when you think you've made the draw or it's very boring is usually when you get sloppy, and when that happens, you can fall asleep at the wheel, and if you make one wrong move, suddenly the game spins out of control. So we get takes, knight e8, and after the move h4, we get the move rook c5, and now rook b4 is played by Gukesh, and at this point, Anish is actually in serious trouble here because the pawn on b7 is weak, the pawn on c4 is also a little bit weak, and this pawn on e5 can potentially become a target if white plays the move h5 to attack this knight on this g6 square. So we get rook takes pawn, rook takes b7, Anish goes king f8, and now we get the move rook b8. Now at this point, the players are getting low on time. I think they had something like 3 or 4 minutes left on the clock. It's not an easy position to play for either side here, so I don't really fault Gukesh for missing the best line in this position, but nonetheless, he should have played the move h5. Now, the reason that white is better here is primarily the pawns are split, meaning that both these pawns can become very easy targets. This pawn on e5 also is a little bit weak, and to make matters worse, black's knights are not very well placed either, whereas white's knights are very critically placed on e3 and f3. You target this one, you can even jump to d5 or f5. These knights give white an advantage. Now, the reason that Gukesh would have been much better is that had he played h5 after knight e7, rook b8, and knight c6, white can now go rook a8, and after king to e7 is played, you have this move knight to h4 here, and suddenly these knights are springing into the action. Now, if Anish plays move knight d6 to try and stop the knights from jumping to f5 without massive trades, after king to g2 here, rook to a2, and this move g4, what's happening is that white now is getting ready to move one of these knights to d5 or f5, and black still has this weak pawn on a6. There's still all these weak squares, weak pawn on c4, and this weak pawn on g8, and long term, white has great chance to win. Now, do I think this is realistic? No, absolutely not in a rapid or blitz game, but it's still worth pointing out. So after king to f8, Gukesh plays the move rook to b8. We get king e7, we get rook b7, king d8, rook b8, king e7, and now we get the move knight d2. Now it's interesting how Gukesh chooses to play on in this position because frankly at this point I would argue that if anybody is better here, it is probably Anish. But I think the one good thing about Gukesh is that he's trying to play games to the end regardless of the objective evaluation. Now in a classical game it might not be as practical, but in a rapid and blitz game it's a very good decision because there isn't a whole lot on the line, and it also gives you some insight into your opponent and whether they're going to try and grab the fully reigns and take over the game, or whether they're still content to make a draw, which would show some effect and some fear that they have of your play. So we get knight d2. Knight d6 is played to guard the pawn on c4 with the bishop and the knight, and now we get to move rook a8. Anish goes knight to f8. We get f4, f6, rook a7, and now after knight d7, black's knights are very, very well placed here. The knight on d6 attacks the pawn on e4, guards the pawn on c4. You can even try to bring the other knight to c5, and with no real weaknesses on the king side for the knights to jump to, especially with this knight on d2, which can't get to f5 or d5. If anybody's better here, it should be black. So we get king f2. Anish goes rook a2. We get knight to d1 back, guarding the pawn on b2, and here we get the move knight b5. Gukesh plays bishop b1, we get rook a5, rook a8, and now we get knight d6 back. Gukesh plays f5, bishop f7, and now we get the move g4. Now the interesting thing here is that had Gukesh played the move rook to a7, the game almost certainly would have ended in a draw once again after knight b5. But Gukesh continues to play on here with f5, we get bishop f7, and now we have the move g4. Anish goes knight b6, rook b8, knight d7, rook a8, knight b6, and now we get the move rook to b4. Now again, for a third time in the game, Gukesh has gone against his better judgment and chooses to play on. But the thing about playing on here is, even if I look at this position, I think that only black can be better here. If you know your opponent is happy to make a draw, you're not really all that worried. You can tell that they're a little bit afraid of you. They're not really trying to play the absolute best moves. They're simply trying to end the game immediately. And that gives you a lot of confidence to continue to proceed trying to go for more. So we get rook b4. Now we get rook c5 from Anish. We get rook to a4, a5, knight e3, knight b6, rook a2, and now we get the move bishop e8. Now this is a nice move from Anish here, because when you have the bishop on this diagonal, the bishop is not really doing a whole lot. But after you get bishop e8, and we're going to get this bishop to c6 here, now the bishop guards the pawn, but the bishop and the knight are always permanently spying this pawn in the center of the board. So Gukesh goes king e3. We get rook a5, knight g3, knight d7, knight h5, king f8, knight f3, and now we get the move knight c5. Now at this point, Anish has maneuvered like a magician. He has gotten the knights on the ideal squares to pressure the central pawn. Also, knight b3 is an option here, and so Gukesh must retreat. Now it's in this position that Anish plays move knight f7, and this is simply a very, very passive move here, and it's not a move that I'm a big fan of. In this position, I thought that Anish should have played the move knight to b3, and the reason that I think this move is so much better here is that when you play this move knight to b3 in this position, White's rook on a2 is simply trapped. This rook cannot get out of the box. White would love to put the rook on a1 and then bring the rook to the king side and try to attack with something like g5. But if you put this knight on b3 here, the rook is kind of in jail. You can't go to a1, you can't take the pawn. This rook is never getting into the action. Now, if White were to say trade the bishop for the knight, after takes, rook a1 and knight c4, king e2, knight takes pawn. Black has two pawns here. Black can push the p very easily and end the game in a hurry. So in this position, I would have loved to have seen knight b3 from Anish, but instead we get knight f7, trying to stop White from playing g5. We get rook a1, rook b5, rook a2, and now we get the move rook to b8. We have knight d2 played, knight d6, knight f3, and here Anish goes for the move king to e7. Now, the line that gives black a huge advantage here is very, very tough to find. Maybe in a classical game you could spot it, but definitely in a rapid or blitz game with time winding down, it's not inevitable, sorry, it's impossible, which is you can play this move pawn to a3. Now, the reason this move is so good is that if White takes with the rook, you have rook takes b2, and after knight to e1, trying to guard this bishop on c2, you have the great sack, rook b3, sacking the rook. And if White moves the rook, you win the pawn in the game. And if White takes back, after pawn takes bishop, here come these knights combined with the passed pawn. And White is just getting cooked. If you go rook a1, there's knight c4, king e2, b2, rook b1. And after knight to a4, you threaten to take the pawn, fork the king and the rook. And after king d3, knight a3, these knights rule the day, and black wins the game. So it's a really, really cool maneuver that would win there. And if White were to take with the pawn, again, you go rook to b3, sacking the rook. And if White plays a move like knight e2, trying to guard the pawn, you can just ignore it and take. And after bishop b3, takes, rook b2, and this move knight to d6, knight to d2, and h5. Suddenly, with the knights very active here and the pawns on the king side collapsing in terms of the structure, black is apparently winning. Now, is this going to happen in a human game? Very, very tough. I don't think it's realistic. Maybe in classical game where you can think for 20 minutes, it's a possibility, still unlikely, but it could happen. Of course, in a rapid game or a blitz game with time winding down, it's not going to happen. We get king to e7, and now the game ends peacefully in a draw very suddenly. Now, what conclusions can we draw from this game? For me, the clear conclusion is that Anish was very happy to make a draw from the get-go, but more importantly, he was scared of Gukesh. Because when I look at this final position, even if you don't see a3, logically speaking, when you look at the placement of D's knights and the bishop pressuring the pawn on e4, you combine that with this great rook on b8, spying the pawn on b2, everything being guarded. All of Black's pieces are perfectly placed. Black has achieved complete harmony, and I think even Anish had to know that he was better here. Now, Gukesh no doubt also probably thought Black was better, but it's a big confidence boost when you're playing these sorts of players and you get the sense they're happy to make a draw, even in positions where they should be trying to play for the win. So, Gukesh draws his first game of the day in round number 7. That kills his 5-game winning streak, but nonetheless, he is still leading in the event. So, let's move on to round number 8. Now, round number 8, Gukesh is playing here with the black pieces against Ivan Saric, the local hero and the wild card in this event. We got to move e4, Gukesh plays e5, knight f3, knight c6, and now we get bishop b5 with a classic Spanish once again. Now, Gukesh is playing one of the presumably weaker players in this event, so of course he's going to play a6. He's not going to play at Berlin, where white can force multiple draws. We get a6, bishop a4, and now we have the move knight to f6. Saric castles, we get bishop e7, and now we get to move rook e1, b5, bishop b3, castles c3, and here we get to move d5. Now, this, of course, is the classic Marshall Gambit in the Ruy Lopez. Now, this is one of the earliest systems that I actually ever saw. One little fun story that I'm going to tell you guys right now is the very first super tournament that I ever went to was in New York City, I believe in 1995, 30 long years ago, and there was a game I saw that was played between the American Grandmaster Nick DeFermian and the British Grandmaster Michael Adams, which had this gambit. Now, this gambit is one of the greatest gambits of all time. It has really stood the test of time as it was first played, I believe, in the late 1930s, maybe early 40s, in the famous game between Capablanca and Frank J. Marshall. It was a game that Capablanca would win with the white pieces, but even though that game was played nearly 90 years ago, it has remained in fashion, and to this day, it is considered the most solid defense for black. So we get takes, knight takes d5. Usually, by the way, just to make one last point, people try to avoid the Marshall Gambit with moves like d4 or a4 or h3. Generally, the gambit is considered so solid that it's very hard to prove an advantage. So we get d5, takes, and now we get the move bishop b7. Now, the original gambit featured this move pawn to c6, but due to the strength of modern-day computer programs, we've seen that almost anything is acceptable. So we get the move bishop b7 here. This is also a relatively decent line. The main issue for white here is that you'll notice you have 1, 2, 3 pieces that aren't developed. So we get the move queen to f3. Now we get bishop d6 being played by Gukesh, and here we get the move bishop takes d5, and now we have c6. Now this is some fancy schmancy maneuvering here. As you look at this, you're probably thinking, well, why doesn't white play rook takes d5, right? After bishop takes d5, for example, you take, and here white has 2 extra pieces for the rook. But the big problem is that after rook takes d5, black can go queen to e7, setting up the classic ice skater checkmate. So you play, I don't know, like d4, queen to e1, king got stuck on the back rank, and it's GG, why not? So, after rook takes d5, queen e7, white tries to play queen e3 here, and after rook a e8, it's the same problem. If white takes, you take, and after king f1, rook f8, it's spaghettio, the double stack is infiltrating, and because white has not moved any of these pieces on the queen side, this is GG, why not? So we get bishop takes knight, c6, Saric plays rook e1, and now we get pawn takes bishop, and the move d4. Now, black here is down 1 pawn. You can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and white has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. White is up 1 pawn, but black has 2 bishops here and very quick development on the open file, whereas white still has 3 pieces that haven't moved yet. So we get queen c7. Saric plays g3, rook e8, takes, and now we get the move bishop e3, and here Gukesh plays the move b4. Now, again, if white were able to finish this development, let's say white could get the knight here, bring the rook into the game, it's not a big advantage for white, but white should be a tiny bit better. But when Gukesh goes b4, he's trying to take advantage at the last moment of the fact that white has not developed the rook or the knight here. So we get a3. Gukesh takes, knight a3, queen b6, and now we get the move b4, and Gukesh plays queen c6. Here we get bishop d2, and now after the move a5, black has completely equalized in this position, because if white were to, sorry, not play knight c2, if white were to take this pawn on a5 here, black can play the move queen to a4, and suddenly you have the slight issue with the knight on a3 being pinned. If you move the knight, you lose the rook. And if you go c4, which is the other logical move here, after bishop to a6 here, it's a very, very tough position for white to play. After you go c5, there's queen d4 hitting the rook. And if you play a move like queen f5, which is apparently the top computer line, after something like takes, queen d3 takes, queen a3, and queen d7, with all these weaknesses on the long diagonal looming, this white king is in a lot of trouble. So we get knight c2, we get a4, knight a3, queen d7, rook e1, takes, and now we get the move h6. Now you're probably a little bit shocked to see that the computer actually gives black an advantage here, but the main reason is that white cannot really push these pawns on the queen side. You cannot push this pawn without losing the horse. If you push this one, this diagonal opens and you're in all kinds of trouble. So with the inability to push these pawns combined with this weak king and some light squares around it, black is completely fine. So we get h4, bishop f8, bishop d2, bishop a6, king g2, and now we get to move queen e6. Here we get queen to e3, and now Gukesh plays queen f5. Serge plays queen e8, we get bishop c8, and now we get to move bishop to f4. Now this move is a very, very serious mistake. As you guys can tell, the bar drops to 0. That being said, this is a rapid game. It's tough to understand why, but the reason is that black can play the move bishop e6. Now you're probably thinking, what is this move? White goes bishop d6, you win the bishop on f8 with the pin, game over. What is white doing? But after bishop d6, black can go king h7. You take with the bishop, there's queen e4 check hitting the king. If you block, it's uh-oh spaghetti-o time. There's bishop h3 checking the king. You take, you lose the queen, you lose the game. Additionally, after queen e4, if you move the king to g1, there's queen to e1 check, and you have the same issue. And if you go king to h2, for example, after takes, king h1, bishop to g4, suddenly, actually I should say bishop h3, probably even easier. There's a checkmate on g2, and white cannot stop this checkmate without giving up the queen. So bishop to e6 would have been winning here for Gukesh, but he plays another logical move, bishop d7. Now, however, Serge is able to bring the queen back before black can bring the queen in and start attacking with the queen and the bishop. We get g5, takes, and now we get the move bishop b8. Gukesh plays g4, and this move is actually a slight mistake. Now, I don't fault Gukesh for playing this move, but the reason this move is a mistake is now after bishop f4, this pawn is a little bit extended here, and now you can't ever really activate this dark square bishop. The pawns guard each other, and the bishop cuts off the other diagonal. So this bishop on f8 is now not a great piece. What Gukesh should have played here was something like f6 if he wanted to keep it going, to bring the king to the center of the board. Maybe queen h3 also is good here. I'm not sure exactly why. Actually, you can check and go bishop f5, but this to me doesn't make a whole lot of sense, and I don't really think this would be played. So we get g4, bishop f4, now we get queen h7, f3 is played, and here we get bishop to f5. Serge plays king g1, we get queen g6, takes, and bishop e4 I should say, and now we get to move king f2. Now again, much like the first game of the day, it's very clear that Gukesh is trying extremely hard to keep the game going at all costs, throwing all caution to the wind here. It's still completely fine for black, but you have to be a little bit careful because now you're down 2 pawns here in this position, and the bishops are not super active. So we get queen h7, king e1, bishop d3, queen to e5, and now we get queen h1, king d2, and the move bishop g6. Serge goes back, we get queen e2, queen h1, queen e1, queen h3, and now the move g5. Gukesh plays bishop e4, we get king c1, queen g2. Again, white has maneuvered the king around to this b2 square, and now with the king on b2 and the knight on a3 and no actual checkmate threats, if anybody is to be careful here, it actually is black, because now there's no checkmate threat, the king is safe, and this queen covers the second rank and all the checks. So the king and the knight, and white having 2 extra pawns here, if white can now say get this queen to h2 and bishop e5, suddenly white's the one trying to checkmate because there are no checks on the second rank, and this knight on a3 covers the b1 square. So here after king b2, we get to move bishop e7, queen h2, queen d1, knight c2. We got a bunch of moves being played, g6 takes, and now we get to move knight a3. Gukesh plays queen d3, we get queen c2, back, queen d1, bunch of moves here, f6, bishop f4, queen d1, knight c2, queen d2, and now we get knight a1. Gukesh plays king f7, queen c1, bishop d3, queen d2, bishop f8, We got to move king a3, king b2, knight c2. A lot of dilly-dallying here. Both sides keep the game going. But now we get king takes a4. Now, the funny thing about this game is that Gukesh has had many opportunities to draw, but he keeps trying to keep the game going at all costs. And Serge takes a pawn, and now Serge has 2 extra pawns, and the king actually is going to be safe on b3 or b2. And as you can tell from the valuation bar, white is technically winning. So we got check, queen c4, king b2, check, queen d2, knight c2, knight a3, bishop e7, queen c1. We got more blocks, and now we get this move, queen d2. Now, at this point, Serge decides to make the draw, which is kind of funny in a way after trying so hard to play for more. The computer says after knight to e3, white is actually close to winning here, primarily because after bishop e7, you can go queen to f1, queen d2, king b3, and this knight covers the critical c2 square, and now you're eventually going to start pushing your p here. After king f8, there's like queen d1, queen h2, and after b5, the white pawn goes up the board, and white probably wins. But again, Serge was playing for a draw for so long and under so much pressure that he's very happy to simply make the repetition and end with a draw. So what does this show? This shows yet again that we have another opponent who at some point, instead of being objective about the moves, is happy to end the game. Now, unlike Anish, Serge is in a different position. He's obviously not a top 10 player. He's probably happy with the results, so it's not quite the same. But it does show that Gukesh continues to overpress in a lot of these positions, and his opponents, whether it's out of fear or they're uncertain about what's going on, they are happy to make a draw instead of pushing for more. So we get a second draw now in a row for Gukesh, and now we're going to take a look at the third and final game. Give me 1 second, you guys, because I did start this recap a little bit early, so I do need to pull this back up. Give me 1 second, you guys. I'm going to copy the PGN over. You just get to see how the sausage is made. Let's get going. I'm going to copy this. We're going to go here. We're going to copy it, and off we go. Now I'm going to update the details. 1 second, you guys. This takes just a jiffy. We got Wesley, and here we go. So Gukesh playing with the white pieces in the 9th and final round. He is already guaranteed that he is going to win the rapid portion. As I think I mentioned in yesterday's video, it is a combination of rapid and blitz. There's no guarantee that Gukesh will win, but he's already guaranteed that he's going to win the rapid portion with a spectacular event. But now in the final round, he has his final white game and a chance to really finish in style. So Gukesh is playing Wesley, so the game starts with knight f3. We get d5, b3, c5, e3, and now we get to move a6. Gukesh plays c4 here, and I'm going to be honest, this opening is in the spirit of none other than yours truly. I swear I've played this position with b3, e3, and knight f3 probably 1,000 times online, so it's nice to see Gukesh paying ode to the famous streamer. So we get c4, d4, bishop to a3, and now we get to move queen b6. Here, Gukesh plays g3, we get knight c6, bishop g2, and now we have the move bishop g4. Gukesh plays h3, bishop h5, and now we get castles. Now, this is a very weird opening here because we have the classic Ben-Oni structure with these 2 black pawns and these white pawns potentially on d3 and c4, but white has brought the bishop out to a3 very early, trying to hamper black's usual development. So we get takes, d takes e3, and already here after pawn takes pawn, Wesley is in a lot of trouble, as you can tell from the valuation bar. We get e6, knight c3, and now we get to move bishop e7, and here Gukesh plays queen e2. Now, the reason that black is worse here is primarily that with this bishop on a3, white has ideas like knight to a4 here, there's g4, there's also the open file, and you have this great fianchettoed bishop on g2. So Wesley goes f5 here, and this move is simply a serious error. Now, it's understandable for Wesley to play this move here, but I will say that knight to f6 would have been preferable. Basically admitting your worst here, but just trying to finish your development very quickly. Instead, we get the move f5. Now Gukesh plays queen c2, we get knight to f6, and here we get the move knight to g5, targeting the weak pawn on e6. Wesley goes knight d8 to guard the pawn here. We get knight e2, trying to rotate the horse to f4. Now we get h6, knight f3, queen c6, and this move is simply terrible. Now, I think at this point, Wesley was probably very unhappy with his position. If he were to castle after knight f4, bishop f7, and knight e5, look at these knights, look at these bishops on the open diagonals. White has perfectly placed minor pieces here, and black is in all kinds of trouble. So Wesley goes queen c6, walking into all kinds of fossils here, and now Gukesh plays knight h4. Now, this move might not be the best move, but I really like this decision because it'd be very easy to sink into a deep thought here for 5 or 10 minutes. And you're like, okay, the queen's on the diagonal. Can I go like g4 and like knight e5? Can I maybe like go like knight d4 or like knight e5 or some big tactic? But Gukesh very calmly plays knight h4, ignoring the massive complications. And after queen c7, simply playing knight f4. And here come these knights targeting the e6 and g6 squares. We get g5 from Wesley, knight takes bishop, pawn takes knight. We get bishop b2 here, pinning the knight on f6, and now Wesley goes rook f8. Here Gukesh plays knight to f4, a very nice positional move here as the knight spies the pawn once again. You'll notice here you've got the great bishops are both fianchettoed here. You've got the open file for the rooks. This black king cannot get out of the center of the board, and this is already turning into a supreme masterpiece. So Wesley goes rook g8. Gukesh takes on h4. We get the move e5, and now Gukesh plays the move knight to e2. After knight to e2 here, now the pawn on e5 is weak, the pawn on f5 is weak, and unless black has a very quick way to target the king on g1 with the bishop on g2, this is already GG. Wesley goes to e4, and now we get the move knight to g3. Another very nice move from Gukesh here. Knight to f4 feels a little bit more human perhaps, but after knight c6, black is trying to castle out of the center of the board, and if black can get castled with this open file, you never know what could happen in a rapid or blitz game. But when Gukesh goes knight g3, now the pawn on f5 and the pawn on e4 are both weak. Black does not have time to castle, and already here I think that Wesley could resign. Wesley goes knight c6, and now we get knight takes f5. I really would have liked to have seen rook d1 here from Gukesh, stopping Wesley from castling the king, but knight takes f5 is also more than good enough. Here we get castles from Wesley, and now Gukesh takes and plays rook d1. And at this point, even though there's a pin on the g file, with this pawn on e4 collapsing here and the knight also being able to retreat, this pin on the file simply is irrelevant. And already here, white is up, what, 2 pawns? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's soon to be 3 pawns after queen takes e4. And here Wesley plays queen e5. We got knight takes h6. Gukesh picking up a 3rd pawn as the knight can drop back to g4, blocking the threats on the file. We got rook takes bishop here. Wesley desperately sacks the rook, hoping for a miracle. We get king takes, rook to h8, and now we get rook to d5, queen e6, and Gukesh plays knight to g4. Wesley goes bishop takes h4, and now we get the move f3 here, and Gukesh is just mopping up in this position. The knight can't get to the center of the board. This knight's out of play, the rook isn't quick enough, and white has the 2 towers. Everything is just collapsing. Wesley takes on f3, we get rook f3, we get king to b8, and now Gukesh plays the move queen to f5. Not the only way to win, but following in the steps of what I've said many times, which is when you're way ahead in material, it doesn't matter if you play the absolute best move. If you can trade off the heavy pieces, specifically the queen or the rooks, you're going to win the game. Even if it takes 10 moves more, it doesn't matter because you'll win the position 100 times out of 100. So Wesley goes queen to e7, and now we get queen to f7. Nice move from Gukesh, offering the trade of the queens. Wesley goes queen e4, the only move to keep the queens on the board. And now after the move queen to f4, checking the king and forcing the trade of the queens, Wesley resigns here because after takes, rook takes f4, white has a rook and 2 pawns for the bishop here. It's more than enough firepower. Gukesh is going to win this position 100 times out of 100, and therefore Wesley resigns. So with that, Gukesh wins a very nice game in the final round. A very classy game, very fundamentally sound, just a pure blowout, just destroys Wesley, who is considered to be one of the most solid players in the world, in really fine fashion. So with this victory, I should say, Gukesh dominates in the rapid portion. He wins 6 games, loses 1, and has 2 draws. I think he has at least a 3-point margin as the players head into the blitz portion, which starts tomorrow. But nonetheless, really amazing stuff to see. And this is why one thing that I said yesterday, I really want to hammer home as a point again, which is that it's very easy to say that someone is weak in a certain format. But when you say that, if a player is, say, 25 years old, maybe 30 years old, it can be applicable where someone will not prove in a format. But when a player is very young, very specifically the way that Gukesh is or Praggnanandhaa is, even if they might be bad, let's just say bad, quote unquote, because they're obviously great, even if they aren't playing well at certain formats at various times, when you say they're bad, that doesn't mean they're always going to be bad. It means that they have plenty of time to improve. And so if I look at Gukesh and I see his rapid result, I think there's plenty of room for him to improve. Even if this was a one-off event, one-off performance, and let's say he has a bad rapid event next time, it's very clear that he can improve. And I would say the same thing applies to Prague or any of these kids, where you can't make blanket statements the way that Magnus did about players, because they're so young and they have so much time to improve. Anyway, very, very impressive performance from Gukesh. I mean, it's just simply out of this world good from him. Today, this last game specifically, I think it really shows how strong he is. He wins the rapid portion. We'll see if we can hang on, if he can hang on and take the victory overall after the blitz. I'm sure Magnus will be out for blood. It's going to be a very exciting next 2 days with 18 games of blitz. But Gukesh shows his class and why he deserves to be the world champion. So on that note, I hope you guys have enjoyed this recap from day number 3 of the Super United Rapid and Blitz Chess Tournament being held in Zagreb, Croatia. If you're not already subscribed to the channel, make sure that you smash that subscribe button below, and we'll be back with some more great recaps in the coming days. Hope you guys enjoyed it and have a great rest of your day. See you soon. Bye.